In this video, we'll learn about teaching theories majorly. So in the first video, I spoke about concept of teaching. From concept of teaching, I explained the teaching pyramid, which is super important. Smaller topics such as pedagogy and other key terms and definition, you can directly learn from notes as they are not very difficult to understand. So today, I'll mostly be talking about teaching theories. So this is a brief overview of what teaching theory is. This slide gives an easy mind map view of all the important teaching theories that might come in the exam. From here, some of them are important, like the Bloom's taxonomy, constructivism, information development model, but we should know about the rest of the theories as well. So, from this particular slide, what I want you to learn are the key proponents of each of the theories. For example, the key proponents of behaviorism would be B.F. Skinner, John Watson, and what is the core concept that they're talking about. So, the kind of questions that you can expect is sometimes they'll give you the core concept and you have to figure out who the proponents are or what theory it is from. And sometimes the model is given and you'll have to figure out who gave it. So, this is the kind of questions that you can expect. So, just go through this. I've divided them into smaller chunks so that it's easier to understand. All right, there is one more question that might be popping up in your head, which is why do we need teaching theories? We basically need teaching theories because they help us understand the cognitive development of students so that we can better enhance their retainment and enhance engagement. For now, let's move on to the first major teaching theory, which is Bloom's taxonomy. Bloom's taxonomy is basically a hierarchical framework which helps us to classify learning and instructional objectives. Be very wary of the key terms. NTA loves playing with key terms. They'll just take a particular term and then ask you question based on that term. So whenever you're studying, your key terms should be completely clear to you. Then to figure out tricky questions will be super easy. So, under Bloom's taxonomy, we have the cognitive domain, the affective domain, and the psychomotor domain. And in cognitive domain, it's mostly about knowledge, thoughts, thinking, studying. For example, the hierarchy goes from memorizing to reasoning. Next, affective domain, which talks about emotional intelligence of learning and how we grow from learning about something to finally forming values and a personality around it. Next is the psychomotor domain. For example, when you're first learning cycling, you first look at someone who's actually cycling. Based on what the person is doing, you try to imitate and then finally go off doing your own tricks. So let's learn a bit deeper about the cognitive domain. So from here, you have to remember the hierarchy because the questions that UGC asks us is based on the hierarchy. They might ask you questions like, is evaluating a higher domain than understanding? Is analyzing a higher domain than applying? So you'll have to learn the hierarchy. And I suggest using mnemonics for remembering the hierarchy so that you don't forget it. So the mnemonics for this you can use RUAAEC, right? Real underwater adventure always excites creatively. So this helps your brain visualize, hence it will remember easier. And what each of this term means is pretty easy. It's in the word itself. So even if you do forget the hierarchy, but if you remember the meaning of it, then you can easily make sense and know what the correct answer is. Remembering is recalling from long term memory basic facts and figures. Understanding means making sense of the material what you've learned. For example, you're able to differentiate between A and B, positive and negative example. Applying means, let's say you learn about the Pythagoras theorem, now you're able to apply it in a particular question. Okay? Analyzing means breaking the concepts into parts and understanding how each part works. Evaluating is basically making judgment based on a set of guidelines. For example, Britishers came to India and there are different school of thoughts whether how they helped, whether they were bad for the Indian economy or not. You are now able to make judgment based on what it's written. And finally, creating, you're able to spun your own story, which simply means reading something, putting your own thought process into it, and creating something new. So they might ask you making sense of the material, is better than making judgments. So the hierarchy. So they might ask you that way, or they might directly ask you whether remembering is on top or analyzing. Okay. Next, effective domain. Again, you have to know the hierarchy and what each of this term mean. So let's take an example to understand effective domain better. First, in receiving attention, a kid pays attention to environment and listens carefully. Next, he talks about what recycling is and understands concepts like reduce, reuse, recycle, and how that's helpful to the environment. Next, he's motivated and aligned towards environmentally friendly products. Next is organizing, where he prefers to use cycle or uses less plastic. And finally, characterizing, where his actions are more eco friendly, where he most often than not takes environmentally friendly decisions. Next is the psychomotor domain related to action. So first is imitation. When a kid is first learning how to cycle, first watches how the cycle works. The student learns by watching and copying. Next is manipulation. He tries to cycle on his own and does it step by step. First sits on it and then learns that okay, I need to balance out, and then he learns how to cycle. Next, his actions are more precise. Maybe he learns to do a wheelie, maybe he can stop abruptly. Fourth is articulation, where several skills are performed together. Imagine a biologist looking at a microscope. Take a leaf, take a small cut out of it, put it in the microscope, and then watch it. So, several skills can be performed in a harmonious way. And finally, naturalization, where high level of performance is required, such as a surgeon doing a very complicated surgery. The meaning is pretty easy to understand. Just focus on the hierarchy and what each of this mean. Gagne and Briggs classification of teaching. Now that you've learned about what these key terms mean, the rest of the teaching theories will become pretty easy. So he has also divided in similar way, where there are five categories of learning, and out of this what are the learning outcomes, and this is again the hierarchy that you will have to remember. So first is verbal, which is acquiring facts. Next is intellectual skills, problem solving. Third is cognitive strategies, learning how to learn, which means synthesis, evaluating, critical thinking, hypothetical questions. Fourth is motor skills, learning physical skills. And fifth is attitude. So, as you can see, they're all related. So, once you properly understand the basics and understand the key terms, then rest of the teaching theories you can relate to it. So, even if you forget one, then by method of elimination, and it's MCQs, right? You will be able to figure out what the correct question is. So the point is not knowing everything, the point is to make your basics strong. Okay, so first is signal learning, where you're learning to respond. Next is stimulus response learning, learning to associate. Third is chain learning, sequence of response. Fourth is verbal association, where learning to associate verbal symbols. Fifth is discrimination learning, learning to differentiate between similar stimuli. You have to know the key terms. So, whenever discrimination learning pops up, you know that it's about differentiate. Concept learning means forming a general idea or category. Rule learning is applying a rule to a new situation. You've learned a mathematical formula such as cos theta, tan theta. You look at the angle and you're able to figure out what it is. And next is problem solving, which is to find solution to a new problem. Again, this is pretty easy. Just learn the key terms, what the definition, the hierarchy, and you'll be able to solve any problem there is. Alright, this is again a very important topic where some of the questions in the past couple of years have been asked from it. Jean Piaget's theory of cognitive development, and it's to do from birth to 2 years old to 12 years old, and how does our cognitive development as a kid to an teenager works. So the main gist that you'll have to learn is learning is a process of adaptation to environment. Okay, how does a kid learn? Is he's learning to adapt to the environment. So someone who's born in Nepal would learn to speak Nepali first, and someone who's born in US would learn to speak English first, right? That's our mother tongue. So we are learning to adapt to the environment. Next, learning is dependent not only on experience, not only on the environment, but also on students' maturation. their ability to problem solve, and their curiosity. So, I'm just reading this. A child's cognitive development is not just about acquiring knowledge, and this is one of his main theory. The child has to develop, has to construct a mental model of the world called schema. So, whenever you see key terms like schema, always make sure that you remember it, because NTA again loves playing with key terms and will probably try to form a question around mental model and will ask whether it's related to schema or not. And that's how the questions revolve around paper 1. It is easy if you do the basics, but because there's a lot, we find it difficult. But if you actually dissect the paper, it's not very difficult. So, next, let me quickly talk about cognitive development. So, from birth to 2 year old, a kid is learning mostly from environment and from motor skills. The kid is walking around, falls, learns, adapts to the environment. Next is the pre-operational stage from 2 to 7 years, where this development of language and symbolic thinking is able to decipher what a person is saying to the kid, but is egocentric, difficulty in seeing things from others' perspective, and is not very conscious about their actions. Next is concrete operational, where a bit of logic and reasoning comes into play, able to understand conservation and reversibility. And finally, the formal operational stage for 12 years and above, where you can solve abstract and hypothetical questions, think about the reasons, and then answer it. You're able to use deductive reasoning and problem solve. Alright, now let's learn about Jean Piaget's theory of conservation, which says that children realize the properties of objects, mass, volume, and number remain the same despite changes in form. He gave an example of an cookie to demonstrate the same, and the reasoning behind conservation typically starts around the age of 6 or 7. So, a child who's not developed the reasoning behind conservation might not be able to tell between a cookie split into two and two different cookies, because he's not able to figure out the difference between mass, volume, and number. Under the theory of conservation, we have identity, compensation, and reversibility. Identity says that understanding that an object keeps the same basic properties even if its shape or appearance changes. So, a person wearing a red shirt or a blue shirt is still the same person. Next is compensation, recognizing that a change in one aspect, like size, can be balanced by a change in another to maintain the overall amount. For example, pancakes stacked is still the same as pancakes that are laid horizontally. And third is reversibility, being able to mentally reverse an action and understand that the object can return to its original state. For example, a cookie split into two is still the same cookie. So this is with Piaget's theory of conservation and theory of constructivism. Alright, now let's move on to Dewey's learning theory, where he basically speaks about learning through experience and believes that education should be grounded in real life experience, and argues that students learn best when they engage in activities. So he was a believer of group activities, teaching by learning, workshops, projects, and second was active learning, where he emphasized on importance of active participation. Third, reflective learning, and this was a critical component of Dewey's learning theory, where he believed that students should regularly reflect on their experience. For example, a student studying a particular paragraph from physics can maybe take out ABCD from that particular paragraph, and student B studying that same paragraph might be able to relate more and may be able to take out ABCDEF and much more. So a student who is able to critically think and gain deeper insight will learn more. Fourth is social interaction, where Dewey viewed that learning is a social activity and believed that collaboration and communication are essential for growth. And finally, we have Schumann's model of teaching. Schumann's model of teaching is an instructional facility designed to enhance effectiveness of learning process. And the key components are inquiry-based learning, problem-solving, student-centric, teacher as a facilitator, and collaborative learning. So whenever you have questions surrounding inquiry-based, student-centered problem solving, then you know it's Schuman. And whenever you have reflective learning, learning by doing, then you know it's Dewey's learning theory. Or if you have something related, then it could be both. So this is it with most of the theories. If you don't want to spend a lot of time writing these notes, then you can directly access the notes through spaced revision. I've added all the notes in systematic manner, and I've also added mnemonics for ease of remembrance. Now let's go and do flashcards to see whether you remember some of the concepts that I've taught or not. The first question is on original Bloom's taxonomy is divided into. So this was the first part of the video. So it should be easy for you. Memory, understanding, and reflective. Show answer. Alright, perfect. We got this correct. Now let's do rest of the flashcards and the past year's paper from this topic in the next video. Meanwhile, you go through the notes, remember, and try to solve the past year's paper with me.